And we are live. Hey, everyone. It is Kim Stand-Even and Morna here, the host of The Breathing Space. And we are so excited to be with you live. It's been a few weeks. We've been doing things like pretending to have summer vacations. And you might have actually had a vacation, Kim. What have you been up to?
I've been doing a lot of camping, a lot of lake time, a lot of time with the kids. So this is really nice to have some adult conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. And I've been prepping for my in-laws to come into town, but that is a whole other show that we will do another day. It's a whole other show that we'll do another day. Hey, Vivian. It's so nice to see you. Okay, so if you're joining us live, let us know and let us know where you're tuning in from. And let's get into the show, Kim. So today's show is prompted by a post that we saw on Facebook about triggers. And we thought, okay, we want to talk about this. And so we've put the post in the comments of the show. And before we get into the conversation, I want to say a little bit about triggers so that we are all on the same page in terms of what we're talking about today. So Kim and I recognized when we were doing a little bit of research for this show and doing what we like to call the pre-show show, where we talk about what we're going to talk about and how we feel about the topic, we really became aware that this word trigger is used in a much broader sense nowadays, is what I want to say. It's used in a really broad kind of general sense, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the original intent or the actual definition of the word trigger. So we want to talk about that first and then let you know what we're going to be talking about today. So trigger from a mental health perspective really speaks to post-traumatic stress. And what happens for us when we experience an extremely traumatic event that then continues to show up for us in our bodies and brains, every time we experience something that helps us remember that event, and we can be experiencing it like it's actually happening. So we want to be really clear and say we're not talking about that kind of trigger today. That's above our pay grade. That is the kind of trigger that we would really urge anyone who's watching, who's experiencing that kind of triggering, please get some help. It's really challenging to deal with something like that on your own. And it needs much more intensive support than what we're talking about today. But I do want to say from my own personal experience that it is possible to move beyond those kinds of triggers and to move into the other side. So I want to offer that. And I want to say that we're going to be talking about, and I'm not sure, we need to make up a new word, right, Kim? That's what we're
about. Let's make up a new word.
Let's make up a new word.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll come out today.
Yeah. Let us know what you think the word is.
Let us know what you think the word is, because what we're going to be talking about is a kind of everyday triggers. There are situations all day long for most human beings where we're experiencing something and we're just reacting to it. It could be the way our husband just looked at us, create something. It could be something our kids did. It could be, have you got examples, Kim?
I mean, everything. I kind of feel like it's, I love that story where it's like, if you don't think you can make a difference in the world, pretend you're a mosquito. Because I feel like these things in our life are these mosquitoes flying around that grab our attention and take us out of what we're focusing on. So yeah, it can be people, it could be coworkers, it could be something we see on TV. I was triggered today by something on Facebook, or triggered, say it again. I had a response. And I think it's just taking our attention away in the moment and having a response to it. And I'm struggling to find a word, because that pulling the trigger word feels aligned, but I also want to honor how big it is for the mental health communities. So I want to stay away from using that word, but do you have anything?
It's actually funny, because I was just about to say, let's just go with the word trigger for the purposes of this conversation.
Maybe we should just Yeah.
Because I think that that firing of the gun analogy is a good one, and maybe a distinction to say is it's that immediate reaction. It's something happens and there's almost an immediate reaction, and it feels like there's no control over that reaction. Exactly. Something happens and you do this.
Yeah, it's like
somebody says something and you say that, the firecracker, the whatever. And in the little Facebook photo that we shared in the notes here, I just want to read it out. It says, avoiding your triggers isn't healing. Healing happens when you're triggered and you're able to move through the pain, the pattern, and the story and walk your way to a different ending. And it's actually fascinating just reading that through the lens of what we've just said about trauma versus everyday triggers. I think this one's actually talking more about trauma-related triggering, because, it's talking about moving through the pain, the pattern, and the story. But I think there are everyday pains, patterns, and stories that we experience as well. Yeah. And I'm sorry, Andreas, that I keep bringing you up. I keep wanting to reference my husband. But I think those sort of relationship patterns are easy to kind of grasp hold of and look at. And there are also areas where I know from a how do I transform this pattern or this trigger, they're the areas that I can grasp a hold of and recognize a pattern that I want to change. So I think I just want to find out little notes. The second thing that we were going to talk about is what is healing, but actually what I want to say is, what is transformation? Like, how do we transform these everyday triggers and go from reaction to response? And I want to kind of talk a little bit about what I mean there. So again, I think that reaction is that instantaneous, A happens and I just do B, and it almost is like something else has taken over my body and I'm just doing it. And then and this may be my own personal experience, but I know that when that happens for me, often there's then a period of remorse or regret or whatever, or shame or whatever that comes in after that. But I think responding is something different, and it speaks to something different. So I think for me, it speaks to, okay, the trigger happens, because guess what? We can't actually avoid triggers. No,
they're floating all around every moment, second of our life. Yeah.
Right. They're floating all around. So if our primary strategy is to avoid, then it might be an okay short term, but it's not going to work in the long term, kind of every day. So we need to find a way to respond. And for me, that is, okay, the trigger happens, but then more often than not, we have a moment of choice rather than a moment of automated habitual reaction. Is that how you would see it too, Kim?
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's this space in between the reaction and the response. And it's almost like the training ground for us as human beings is to kind of create more of that space so that we have time to nurture awareness and give ourselves a moment of what's my next move, rather than just bam, going into response. So I think it's really about expanding that space between the moment of sting, if you will, to the moment of responding with an action. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful, and there's actually a psychological term for that. So, we can bring that one in. Yeah, it's called the window of tolerance.
There it is.
Right, it's called the window of tolerance. Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is that, when we're feeling healthy, when we're well rested, when we're feeling kind of emotionally resourceful, we could be triggered by something one day that has no impact on us. We might notice it, but the next day, oh man, that same situation, we're all in. So, I think firstly, it certainly comes down to some kind of basic stuff around taking care of ourselves, or even noticing. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about noticing as part of the kind of walking to a different ending or creating a different ending. Or, I wrote down in our notes, creating an intentional or empowered response. I know for me, I've been taking note of my, I wanted to say womanly cycles,
Womanly cycles.
Yeah. I'm experiencing
Yeah.
quite intense hormonal fluctuations. It's a reflection of the stage I'm at in my life, which I know that many of the people who kind of join in our community are also in similar stages or pretending that they're not. And so, I found that actually I can't necessarily do much to change what's happening for me hormonally, but what I can do and what's been so powerful for me is kept a log of it, kept track of it. Because even that awareness of, oh, it's coming, oh, I'm feeling this because awareness is
yes.
Huge. So Kim, I want you to speak a little bit about awareness, because
I think awareness is
drug, right?
It's the doorway, it's the gateway, it's the key to everything. It is the foundation for creating the life that you desire. It's being the person who you want to be. It's about living in an awake state, because you cannot live your life awake if you're not willing to work on being aware.
Right.
And it's the training ground, I think, as we talked about before. This is a training, a lifelong training. And that's why I want to challenge that new beginning, or what was the beginning piece at the end there? Or the end of the little bit.
Yeah. And then
to change the ending. A different ending. I'm going to challenge that a little bit, because it's like, well, for me, there is no ending. It's a continual journey of awareness and building on that awareness, so that that gap continues to grow and grow and grow, and we get more masterful at it. I don't know if we'll ever master it, but more masterful. That we go into awareness quicker. We catch ourselves quicker. I think that's what it is for me for awareness, is that we're catching it. We're the times where we have to go into remorse and backpedal in our life and make amends with people gets less and less, because we're catching it and we're making decisions faster and more masterful when we work on being aware. Yeah.
I love that. And I love it. And and there's a couple of things it brings up for me. One is even just the phrase awareness of our awareness, which I'll say something about.
So true.
Right. So for me, what I found one of the most practical tools, and this is a takeaway for anyone watching, is firstly, there's the awareness of situations that we find challenging. And then once we are aware of those situations and conscious to them, making an intentional choice about how we enter them. And that doesn't need to be a big hoo-ha production. For me, what it looks like is, okay, maybe I know that I've been having really challenging interactions and conversations with my teenage daughter. And maybe many of those situations have been going in a direction that I didn't want them to go. Of course, that's completely hypothetical. None of that is actually happening. Of course, it's all happening in my house. So for me, firstly, okay, I have awareness of that. So what am I going to do with that? There are lots of things I could do with it. I could go into some awful shame spiral about how I'm a terrible parent and blah, blah, blah. And actually, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Well, what's far more useful and what really works for me is if I just pause for a few moments before I enter her bedroom or before I enter her space or whatever, and just say to myself, how do I want to show up? And what is my plan if I feel those triggers coming on? What am I going to do? Because I've already planted a conscious seed in my brain to respond differently, to give myself that gap and to have a plan in advance. It's like, I think often, it's like when we're in a crisis scenario, for example, if there was an earthquake here now, well, that's not the time to go out and buy my emergency supplies.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. I need that figured out. And then, I wanted to segue into just talking a little bit about awareness with compassion, and how those two things, I believe, must go together if we're going to cultivate healthier ways to respond. Because, if you become conscious and aware of something that you're doing, and then you go into a story about that, and you're telling yourself, well, this is because I'm X, Y, Z, and oh my God, I always do this, and
the beating up of,
the beating up of, we're creating more of what we don't want. And I mean, there are lots of different stories we could make up about that situation. So a really useful story, if you want to tell yourself a story about that, is, oh, I'm aware of this now. It doesn't matter if I've done this 50,000 times. Now I've got some choices around what I do.
Yeah.
Or you can just, if you feel that story coming on, then you can actually label it thinking in your brain.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Thinking.
Just thinking. Yeah.
Thinking, and let it go.
That's great.
What works for you, Kim? Oh, go
what
for
works? No, there was something I wanted to share, and I lost it, which is that thinking piece, right? I'm just gonna let that go, and maybe it'll come back. Yeah, awareness is the key. I just want to keep coming back to that. Can you read out the image again?
Avoiding your triggers isn't healing. Healing happens when you're triggered and you're able to move through the pain, the pattern, and the story and walk your way to a different ending.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, was around the avoiding. What comes for me when I think about avoiding is, what we're really avoiding is vulnerability. Because to heal, to be aware, is to be vulnerable and honest and real. And it can feel easier to wrap ourselves up in a whole bunch of armor and go out into the world. But to really heal and be in a space of creating that extra space to make choice is vulnerable, because we have to have those conversations with our daughters. We have to ask ourselves who we want to be. We have to define what matters to us, and that can open up more stuff, right?
Boy, can it ever. I mean, I just want to put a big underscore under everything you've said, and just highlight it by saying it really takes radical self-responsibility as well. Because I feel often in situations where we're triggered, it's about the other person. You did this and it caused me to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And I think that's where and I think that's why we're seeing what we're seeing in the world right now, is this constant battlefield, right? Of like us against them and me against you. And I think this conversation really speaks to, is this even necessary? Can we create some space even within that? There's just so much to say around.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah.
Vulnerability.
If we create space, and excuse me, one thing I know for certain, for sure, for 100% certainty, having done so much work over the years around conflict and working on consensus, is that in any situation, in any conflict situation, both people are usually right.
Yeah.
There's an element of rightness to almost anyone's position. And so, gosh, the reason I'm having a little moment of kind of steering off into space is because I'm realizing that that's a whole other show, and an area that it's a whole
we
other
tend
show.
to do that, don't we? It's like, let's open this door. Let's open
that door and this door. So let's close off. Let's come back before we close off and just review some of our feelings and ideas around everyday triggers. And I just want to mention again, if you are experiencing post-traumatic stress, if you're experiencing that really intense level of triggering, then it is something that to notice and seek help with. Ruth just said pausing is so powerful. Even if we don't do anything more, can't think of the why we might need to, just pausing is enough to change how we then respond.
Perfectly said.
Thanks for closing out the show, Ruth. Thanks for closing out the show. And actually, just as a takeaway, I would just invite anyone watching to start start an awareness practice. And it's really simple. I mean, I'm sure there are a million different practices we can do to increase our awareness. In fact, they are, and that's another show, and we teach those, and that's great. I'm curious as to what you'd say about this. I would write it down. If you've got a journal or a diary or even your phone or something you use, write it down, because the act of writing something down is super, super powerful.
Yeah.
And Ruth's just saying anytime for helping. Is there anything you want to say in closing, Kim?
Yeah, I agree with you. Awareness practice, any kind of reflection practice opens up your awareness. Yeah, journaling is a great one.
That's us. Thank you for joining us. If you watch today or if you're watching the replay, let us know, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on triggers and awareness and reacting and responding and anything. Actually, just before we go, we're going to make a little announcement.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
Let's do it.
Let's make announcements.
Join us for the next 30 minutes where we make it.
Yeah. Where we make more announcements.
So I think the announcement that we want to make is, over this kind of initial period of summer here in North America, Kim and I have been doing a lot of reflection and really leaning into the futures that we're creating. And we've also been doing a bit of a decluttering and consolidation process of our work in the world. And we want to let folks know that this work that Kim and I are doing together is about to take what we'd like to think is a very powerful stand in the world. We're going to be taking a bigger stand for the kind of leadership that we believe, we know is required on the planet at this time. And we're going to be moving this show into the Revolutionary Woman community. And I know that the show is being broadcast there right now. And we're going to be transforming and kind of moving the show towards focusing on what we're calling the call to warriorship, the kind of leadership that we believe is needed on the planet right now. So that's going to be happening in the Revolutionary Woman group. And we're going to be transitioning the Life Design Lab and the breathing space into that group. And we're going to be doing some pretty powerful things over the next couple of months. And we'd really like you to be a part of it. So if you're not in the Revolutionary Woman community, I'm going to put in a link to that community below this broadcast. Come on over and join us, and invite everyone you know to come on over and join us. And we'll be sending out more formal invites to what we're up to. We're going to be doing a couple of really powerful free workshop series and free trainings in that community over kind of the end of August and September that you're going to want to be a part of. So anything you want to add to that, Kim?
Yeah, I think this is a great example of taking action on awareness, because over the summer we've really been becoming more aware of what we want to create together and individually. And this transition, I think, really speaks to that. So we could do a whole other show on transition. But I think another thing I want to just share is that this page is going to be going away as well. And we're going to be focusing our energy on broadcasting in the group. So if you want to see us, you need to get into the group, because this is going to go away eventually, and we'll talk more about that in future shows of when that's going to happen. So
yeah, and there's actually a really powerful reason for doing that, and it's because Facebook does not show things on pages to people. It's very hard to get anything like this seen by anyone, but in a group it's much easier, and it's also, I think, a much safer space to have more vulnerable conversations, because it's a closed community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I think we're done.
I love how you went like that, and then
I know I did. I didn't even notice. I was like, why am I doing that?
Okay, my friends. Yeah. Call to warriorship. We'll see you soon. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you next week. Bye. Bye.